Alright guys, BLM here, back with a new video, and in this video we're back with a ranking that I promised to do literally years ago, I believe 2 years ago, after I did my initial challenge season ranking. Yet here we're finally getting around to ranking every spin-off in the challenge series, which again is a video I've been holding off for a while. I remember at the time that I initially announced this video, we were in preparation of the World Championship series, and obviously the plan at that point was to do it immediately after the World Championship series was done. Though once that happened, we knew about things like All-Stars 4, USA 2, and considering also the prolonged delay before the airing of All-Stars 4, it really just led to this video getting dragged out a lot, to the point where, again, we're now after All-Stars 4, now we know about All-Stars 5, but screw it, we're still going to do the video here anyway. To be fair, I'll be kind of annoyed if All-Stars 5 ends up being the last challenge spinoff, but either way, whatever, we're going to do it here. We have 14 seasons of the challenge to rank here, all these obviously based on my personal enjoyment. Now I will say the Challenge Sweden will not be included in this ranking, which is a international version of the series, again not actually made by the same producers that make the actual main challenge show, so again because that decided to leave that one off. But again, we'll be including every other spinoff in the series, at least the ones that are competitive reality shows. Again, I'm not going to include CT's Getting Married or like the documentary series, where again this list will contain the Champs Versus seasons, the All-Star seasons, the World Championship seasons, along with a certain other season that will definitely be last on this list. With that, let's get into the ranking itself. At number 14, the worst challenge spinoff of all time is undeniably, to me, Spring Break Challenge, which is really just a nothing season of the show. To be honest, I very much consider, like, do I even bother ranking this amongst the rest of the series? Because it's not really a true challenge season. It's much more this, like, spring break special that they did of having all these, like, spring breakers work in teams that were led by challenge competitors. There's not really a true, like, reality TV aspect to this outside just them doing challenges. We don't really get to know much about them as individuals. We don't really get to see them interact outside of the course of these challenges. Where, again, because that ends up just being kind of boring, it literally just being challenge after challenge after challenge, which again is not that interesting. Especially when we don't know who these people are or have any reason to actually care about these people. Now, obviously, this is the show that Camilla ended up coming from, which, again, probably isn't a positive at this point. But I will say it is a cool idea. Again, the concept of having these, like, challenge legends be coaches for these rookie teams, again, is an interesting concept. Again, we see the return of some pretty big names where I still can't believe that they got Landon, of all people, to participate in this season. But, again, at the end of the day, it's just such a nothing season of challenge. It really doesn't bring anything that you would actually want from the challenge. Again, just feels like something so different from the rest of the series, where again, I would not have normally included this in the bunch, though I do think it would have been weird to not include this season, considering it is, again, still technically a competitive reality TV season, just not a good one at all, and that's why it's here at number 14. Now number 13, actually moving on to the real challenge seasons. Kind of. I mean, starting off with one that, again, you can debate this one a bit, where while I still believe the main challenge producers were still producers on this show, again, they didn't have that much of a hand in it, but that's not really the reason why this season's as low as it is. There's many other reasons for that. But that season is the Challenge Argentina, which is a season that I'm very conflicted on, in the sense that I do think there are good aspects to this season. I think the cast is fun at points. I think there are numerous members of this cast that do come off as pretty big characters. Mind you, I should mention the fact that obviously this is a season in Spanish, is the only spinoff on this list that is not in the English language, which straight up, again, obviously, being one that doesn't know Spanish, again, having to read subtitles when watching the show is, again, a little hindrance to it, though. Really, I think the bigger issue for this show comes down to the fact that it's so long. Like, there's so many episodes. Again, we have essentially 2 episodes for a single round of gameplay, and even then each episode is longer than most normal US episodes, and it's like, again, this is not a fun series to watch because of that. To where, while again there are fun characters here and there are fun moments, and it feels like the cast is having fun in particular. Again, it feels like a cast that, while there were conflicts here and there, again, it seemed like they genuinely gelled with each other, and again, while that can lead to kind of boring TV at points, I think it brings this different vibe to the show that I think, again, fits with this being a show from Argentina, and the fact that, again, as we later see in their interactions with the people in World Championship, again, they are a very lively group, and a group that likes to party and have fun, and again, you can very much get that vibe from their show. But again, I just feel like it's still a season that its prolonged length, along with the fact that its format is one that felt very repetitive in the sense that obviously this is doing more of the same as the other World Championship seasons, with this one, again, just being bloated in length in comparison to those. And straight up, I did not love the fact that there's only one winner in the final. And in general, I do think there's a lot of this season that feels very disjointed from the other World Championship seasons. It felt like they kind of gave producers of the show a bit too free of reins here, to where, again, considering this is still supposed to be part of the lead up to World Championship, again, the fact that this season, again, despite copying a lot of the challenges, tries to do things new, but things that don't really connect with what was necessary for World Championship. And to be fair, again, that's probably more of a flaw in World Championship, which we'll talk about. But still, I think there are just a lot of like kind of nitpicks of this season, along with the fact that, again, it's so bloated and not the most drama-filled season in the world, where at the end of the day, I leave it here at number 13. Now, number 12, moving on to a season that is the complete opposite in literally every single way. We have Challenge UK, where Challenge UK is, again, the polar opposite. It's way too short. Again, even though it's still in the World Championship Series, again, we go from a season with a really bloated length to a season that is literally only 5 episodes. Only 4 actual rounds of elimination, with 2 people getting eliminated in each of those rounds. A season where half the people make the final, and in a season that, again, just feels very derivative of the other World Championship seasons, to where, again, it's using the same challenges as those seasons mixed with also Ride or Dies. To where, again, that definitely... It also has a kind of boring cast where, I mean, when really looking at the cast, I mean, you got Nathan, who I think is a pretty fun character. You have Callum, who can be fun as well. Outside of that, I think you're struggling to look for, like, really dynamic personalities, where even though, like, AJ has a really good arc across this season, I never found them to be the most riveting character in the world. Again, the winners in Tristan and Kaz are both not that entertaining on this season. Zara, despite her coming back for many seasons afterwards, has almost no real role on this season. And again, it just feels like a season that's so short to where you can't really even feel that connected to many of the people here. We're outside of, again, Nathan, Callum, AJ, and you could probably extend it to like Arabella and maybe like Ashley. No one really sticks out from their roles on this season, to where, again, it's just largely a bland season. It's a boring season for the majority of it, despite the fact that it's so short. To where, again, in comparison to Argentina, at least it is so short. Again, at least it was at a length that I actually bothered to rewatch it for this video, where with Argentina, I just could not be bothered considering how bloated of a length that was. To where, to me, like, UK is at least a more rewatchable series. It's one where I can at least tolerate rewatching it, but still not really enough to put it much higher on the list, as, again, it's mostly bad, but it's here at number 12. Now, number 11, we're moving on to a point in the list now where we're getting to, like, again, tolerable seasons. These are seasons that I can watch, enjoy, while there are definitely flaws with them. I think they're at least somewhat competent seasons, but we're going to be starting it off with a season that I really hated when I first watched it, and to be fair, on the rewatch, it's not good still, but I liked it more than I remembered, and that season is Challenge Champs vs. Stars 1. The second in the Champs vs. series, if you're confused by that. But again, Champs vs. Stars is bad. Again, it's a season that is just dominated by the champs the entire time. Stars have absolutely no chance. And really, in general, the stars are not even the greatest TV. I mean, yeah, you do have people like Justina. You have someone like Riff Raff, even though, again, not the most likable figure in the world. Matt Rife makes for okay TV at a point. Outside of that, again, not the most dynamic grouping of stars here, to where mixing that in with the fact that, again, the challengers dominate from beginning to end, facing almost no real adversity the entire time. It really just leads to this, again, being kind of a stale season. Now, I will say, I do think there's more drama on this season than I remembered. I mean, obviously the big moment is the CT Terrell Owens fight, which is still actually a really iconic moment there. And beyond that, again, you do get some conflict within the stars themselves, where we have this like massive division between them. It has some like jockeying for the swing votes, which, again, I think that's at least somewhat interesting. Though I will say it's also really dumb that at this point that for the champs versus seasons, they decide to add in people that aren't champs, which, again, why are they called the champs then? Or again, you were willing to change the names from pros to stars. Why didn't you change the name from champs to like challengers or something? But either way, I think as a whole, again, this is a season that I do find passable. Again, I actually think this is a season that I enjoyed more on the rewatch, to where, while yes, it is still a very gimmicky season, it's one where you could definitely tell the lower budget of the show. You also can tell how watered down the overall challenges were. And again, obviously there was this big disparity between champs and the stars. I still think as a whole, again, I found it to be a passable rewatch. That's why it's here number 11. Now number 10, moving on to a season that I remember liking more than what I have it ranked here, where even though, again, I know a lot of people were disappointed this season at the time, I came out of watching this season the first time around actually enjoying it. So while there definitely were flaws with it, I did come up with a high opinion of it. However, again, having just recently rewatched it, opinion of it did go down. And that season is the Challenge USA Season 1. And yeah, USA Season 1's not that good. I think in retrospect, is still, again, a good concept. I do really like the idea of having a CBS version of the challenge. And again, especially for me in particular, who obviously is a bigger fan of Survivor and Big Brother, to see these people on the challenge is still surreal. I mean, straight up, it is extremely surreal to see the likes of Tyson and Damabate and Tiffany and like Ben, DX, Tasha Fox on the challenge. Again, all that was insane to me. So again, I do still like the general concept of Challenge USA. However, in retrospect, again, it doesn't play out the greatest. I do think there are some good moments for sure. I think the really early portions of the season are pretty strong. I do think you got like the entire arc of James, which I thought was interesting. You have like Alyssa and Kylan backstabbing Xavier, which was really great as well. You get this like feud between Tyson and Sarah, which was interesting. To where, again, I think there are interesting aspects to this season. I do think there is a bit of a lull kind of in the middle of the season that feels like it's kind of meandering around. And I do think in general, the inclusion of Love Island here probably turned out to be more of a negative, where, again, it really felt like they were just simply not playing the game on the same level as the other players, and they were simply being outclassed there. And really the same thing kind of goes to the Amazing Race as well. And even then, you did have the likes of like Enzo and David and Leo, who kept hanging around and being thrown to eliminations every time, which was not the most riveting TV there. And obviously, the main thing that people criticize the season for is the final. I will say, though, me personally, I still defend the final. Not that it's actually good. Again, it's actually in the spot where it's so bad that it's good. But obviously, it's just complete incompetence from production at every single turn. Yeah, I found it to be riveting TV. Again, on the rewatch, I still love that episode. It's still probably one of my favorite individual episodes in the history of the challenge to see how incompetent production is. And seeing this final go wrong at every single turn. Again, literally having Enzo quit at the very beginning, which eliminates Desi, to having Angela have to do the overnight section by herself and her decide to get DQ'd over a misunderstanding of her quitting the round, which she didn't realize would mean she quits the entire final. We have the entire actual final portion of the final where everyone quits but Danny and Sarah, which is still insane. And Sarah winning by complete accident there, just simply because she was the only person left, where, again, it's such a train wreck, but I love it. I love how much of a train wrecky finale it ends up being. I get why people don't like it. I actually personally like the aspect of the season, though I think it really is like the middle stretch of the season that kind of just meanders around. It ends up being not the most entertaining TV for me personally, and that a lot of that seeming to come from a lot of casting of people that simply did not seem meant for the challenge, where while I do think there are some really, really great picks here, there's also some decently big duds to where, again, at the end of the day, it's a mixed bag of a season, but I do have it here at number 10. Now number 9. We're finally getting to the first Challenge All-Star season. And we're going to be starting that off with what is pretty definitively the worst Challenge All-Star season for me. And that season ends up being Challenge All-Stars 3. And again, All-Stars 3 is a season that I was actually really disappointed with at the time. I remember All-Stars 3 was so hyped in my mind. Again, I remember seeing the cast for the first time and thinking that this was possibly one of the greatest casts ever put together for the challenge. And to be honest, might be on paper. I think, especially from the men's side of things, it really is heavy hitter after heavy hitter, to where this was an insane cast when it was first announced. And I think that's what leads to it being very disappointing to see it play out, where it just simply ends up not being that interesting. Where outside of like the rivalry between Wes and Yes, and also again the conflict between the likes of Kayla and Sylvia and Kellyanne, a lot of the season just felt very blah. It just felt like a season where there was a very solid majority and they were sticking together, and it felt like the overall game structure is one that really benefited that majority, where almost every single daily ends up including this like social strategy dynamic to it that allows for this majority to essentially maintain power from the majority of the game, which was, again, not particularly interesting to see. So while it was cool to see like Janae have to play from the bottom a bit more and, again, be able to win some eliminations and go on to win again, that was a cool storyline on this season. I still feel like as a whole, again, the season like just really did not gel with me. It just felt kind of bland for the majority of it, to where, again, it just ends up being a very underwhelming season for me. Again, a season season that, again, I had really hyped up at the time, but really disappointed me on the initial watch. And again, I feel like that opinion just further was solidified through my latest rewatch, where there were so many episodes in the middle in particular that were just kind of lackluster. And also seeing a lot of these people from All Stars 2 come back here, only to be a lesser version of their previous appearance because they were injured still from the previous season, was also like not that interesting. There's so many people that have to leave the game due to medical emergencies, which was underwhelming, to where, again, I think as a whole, All Stars 3 just ends up being an underwhelming season. I think it's a season that, again, I remember being so excited for, yet I feel like the season doesn't really live up to any of that. So because of that, for me, it's here number 9. Now, number 8, we're moving on to a season that I do for the most part very much like. However, like Challenge UK, it is a bit short, almost too short, to where, because I think it makes it a bit tougher to connect to the season as a whole, yet I think what we did get of the season was pretty strong, and that season is Champs versus Pros. Obviously, the first season of the Champs versus Series, and one that, again, I think they did a mostly good job here. Again, a season that actually has Champs and Pros. Who would have guessed that? So again, every challenge competitor here is actually a champion. Also, all of the stars on this season are actually professional athletes. And through that, again, it makes this a more competitive field. Again, we do actually see a lot more back and forth between the champs and the pros, much more so than in Champs versus Stars, where, again, the stars were just getting demolished by the champions there. Where, again, I actually think this matchup here felt a lot more equitable. Beyond that, we actually get some pretty decent storylines here, where, again, while it is a shorter season, again, we did get some good content from a pretty good underdog run from Ashley. If we're going to elimination constantly, we got a lot of drama from Lolo and her having a lot of conflict with her pros team, and again, that was fun. We also get an actual elimination between Bananas and Wes, which, again, in a pre-Total Madness world, again, this was actually a pretty great moment there to see the two finally face off. And even then, Wes has a pretty good run through this season, with him going on to beat Jordan as well, where I think there's a lot to like from this season. So while it is very, very short, I think what we did get in that short period of time was actually pretty good. But again, I do think the fact that it is so short makes it a bit tougher to truly connect to the season as a whole. To where I do think, like, the final outcome, which, while cool, of Darrell and Cara winning after obviously being the first boots in Fresh Meat 2, to see them be paired up again and go on to win a season was, again, cool on paper. The problem is that it felt like none of this season focused on Darrell or Cara Maria pretty much at all, with them kind of being overshadowed in the grand scheme of things. Beyond that, even someone like Cameron, who, again, I know from A&W, but if it wasn't for that, I feel like I would know almost nothing about Cameron outside the fact that he is just a bigger guy, despite the fact that, again, he almost won this season. To where, again, I think there's some pros, there's definitely some cons. I think at the end of the day, though, I do actually really like this season. I just feel like if it was a bit longer and had a bit more stakes to it, I probably would have it assessed a bit higher on this list, but at the end of the day, as of right now, I do have it here number 8. Now, number 7, we're moving back to the Challenge All-Stars. This time going to another shorter season of the Challenge, this one being Challenge All-Stars 1. And All-Stars 1 here actually had a pretty big jump after my latest rewatch of it. Where All-Stars 1 is one that I remember when I made my initial draft of this list. I mean, it was just above Champs vs. Stars 1. Where, again, I had it lower than the likes of All-Stars 3 and USA. I had it around where Champs vs. Pros is, which, to be fair, I mean, it still is. But again, now they've moved up a bit to where, again, All-Stars 1 is a season that I feel like as time went on, my opinion of it kind of dropped. Yet on the rewatch, All-Stars 1's actually still a pretty good season. Now, I do think it is still a bit rudimentary to a degree. I think there's definitely some aspects of the season that just feel like it's All-Stars, not really getting its footing yet. To where, again, I kind of like the modern turn that All-Stars is taking, where while I think they're probably taking it a bit too far in terms of how watered down of a version of the challenge it is, I do like the more, like, retro theming that the season currently has, where I think of All-Stars 1, they end up playing it very straight, where the editing and presentation of the season just feels very in line with just the recent challenge seasons, which, again, is underwhelming to a degree, yet I still think beyond that, we still got some pretty good drama. I mean, we did get, like, the Rochelle Katie stuff early on. We get the Arissa quit, which is still an insane moment. We get, like, Kendall being on the bottom and having a pretty good underdog run, to where, again, I thought there was a lot of fun stuff there. And I think there's still some really surreal casting choices on this season. Where, again, seeing the likes of, like, Yes back after years was pretty insane. Seeing Janae back, seeing even some, like, Alton, who, again, doesn't really bring much this season, but I remember being really surprised at him being back here. Hisela was someone that was a really good surprise here. Nehemiah was cool to see back. Again, we got to see, like, Beth back, Katie back, and Trishelle briefly. Again, I thought there's a lot of cool casting choices there. I also really like the Return to Big Easy, to which, again, might not be super popular, considering I feel like a lot of people already feel like his story is very repetitive and how he constantly wants to prove himself and comes back and doesn't really do so. But I kind of like that on this season he kind of does, at least. Again, he makes it to a final. He finishes the final. Again, I like this storyline on this season, especially with him also winning elimination along the way, to where I also really like the final on this season. I really like how it's formatted. Now, I will say I think there's too many people in the final, and just in general, again, that is a lame aspect of the season. The fact that, again, around half the cast ends up making the final, which, like, why? So again, I think the season that just as a whole is just too short, and I think that is probably the biggest flaw of the season, to where, again, I think outside that, it is a solid season. I think it has all the makings of a great season. However, I feel like its structuring kind of fails it, but it's still a solid season of the show, one that I very much enjoyed on the rewatch, and that's why it's here number 7. Now number 6, we're moving on to another Challenge All-Star season, this actually being the most recent one, that being Challenge All-Stars 4. And Challenge All-Stars 4, I think, is another one, like All-Stars 3, that falls into the disappointing category. I think it's a season that, again, I was disappointed by. I obviously had massive high hopes for the season, and it didn't really live up to that. But it doesn't mean that it's entirely bad. Again, I still really enjoyed a lot of aspects of this season. I still think its cast is a bizarre one, but still one that is very inspired. I really like a lot of the casting choices made for this season. Again, obviously seeing the likes of Cara Maria and Laurel back on this season was really cool to see. Obviously, the return of Cara Maria after a while in the Challenge series was, again, cool to see. The return of Cam and Leroy was also really cool to see back, even though, again, I think they probably got a bit overexposed in the edit. But I also like Steve's run this season. I thought Ace was a really fun Dodo character. You have Nicole Zanata still being entertaining, despite the fact that she's also really annoying to watch. I thought Adam Larson had some humorous content, particularly his rant against Steve towards in the back portion of his run. Also, I like the return of Brandon here. Jasmine was very entertaining. Ayana, again, despite some ickiness, was still entertaining for her short run here. Again, we saw the return of Rachel Robinson, which was insane. Just in general, I think All-Stars 4, again, had a lot to like on a fundamental level. But again, I still think the season as a whole underwhelmed. I think the drama of the season did seem to be a bit watered down from what we were hearing beforehand. I feel like from a competitive standpoint, again, it was a bit underwhelming to see a lot of these more like crapshooty competitions, a lot of these more like Big Brother style competitions being utilized over more like challenge style challenges, where, again, the entire final still feels like a massive parody of the series more so than a final of an actual season of the show. However, again, I also like that the show embraced the retro theming that the series has now adopted, to where, again, I actually do really like how the season is presented, and the fact that it does seem to fully embrace the fact that these are older school competitors, to where, while, again, that isn't necessarily the case with certain people, again, the likes of obviously Cam and Avery, but still, I still think as a whole, I like this season. I get why people don't. And again, I don't like it as much as I was hoping I would. However, I still think it is a competent season of the show, which is why it lands here number 6. But now number 5, and really for me, the top 5 here are pretty definitive. I feel like these are by far the top 5 spin-offs of the show. I really like all 5 of these seasons, even though I feel like that's not necessarily a popular sentiment for the number 5 season on the board here. Yeah, I think this is another one that, again, is underwhelming. It's definitely a season that did not live up to its potential, but I still think it's a solid season. I really enjoyed my latest rewatch of it, and that season is the Challenge World Championship, where, again, I think the World Championships this season, obviously everyone left this season being underwhelmed at how this was the World Championship. Again, a season that had so much setup to it. I mean, we literally had 4 international seasons building up to this season, along with the fact that we also got the return of a lot of big legends of the game. Mind you, even within that, again, there's some really weird random casting choices there. Along with that also comes some random casting choices from the international side of things. Again, the fact that we got, again, most of the winners of all the international series outside of Argentina, where for Argentina, they just picked random people seemingly. So again, Argentina had literally just finished filming and they couldn't get everyone that they wanted back, which, again, you would think is something that you would take into consideration, considering the entire point of Argentina was to build up to this. And beyond that, also just the concept of having Argentina here is something I really don't like, as well as, again, they just had so many disadvantages. The fact that they, again, had the language barrier. They also, again, literally just finished filming their season. They were still injured from that. They also had no social connection to the rest of the people, where, again, they were pretty screwed coming into this season. I think that's something that's not particularly fun to watch. on this season. And also, I really don't like the format of this season. Again, the fact that it's a duo season that has these duos forming at the very beginning and never breaking apart the entire time is so underwhelming for a season that's supposed to be declaring the world champions, aka the best of the best. And essentially, it all comes down to who your partner is from the very beginning. And again, just feels very opposed to the other World Championship series, all of which had these shifting partners, using the algorithm to determine your partners after every round. And for some reason, that was just dropped for the World Championship itself, which is a very strange dynamic as well. Where, again, I think from a pure format and from a production standpoint, this is a poorly ran season. However, I think what really makes the season are the results, where I personally really like how this season plays out. I do think seeing Danny and Sarah in particular play this season in a way where they're really tied down. Obviously, they are these big game players and come from Survivor, want to be pulling off these big moves, don't want to be working with the vets. However, because they're tied to these vets, they're kind of held down in the game. Yet despite that, they still try. And again, I still think that dynamic there is really interesting. Seeing Danny and Tori argue every single episode over what move they're going to make. And that's getting so many deadlock votes across the season is really cool to see from my point of view. And in general, also, again, like literally binging all of the international series outside of Argentina right before watching World Championship itself is also a cool thing to do here as well. Again, seeing the culmination of all these other series, to see these people you saw do well in these other series now face off against each other on World Championship, again, is such a cool concept. And again, seeing the likes of like Kiki and Troy face off against Tristan and Kaz and face off against Sarah and Danny, again, that's cool. And also, again, so surreal to see like Sarah Lacina on the same show as like Johnny Bananas and Jordan Wisely and Tori Deal. So again, there's a lot of just like cool inherent stuff like that on this season that I personally enjoy. And in general, again, I really like how this season plays out. I really like the social dynamics of this season. Sure, well, again, it can definitely be frustrating to see the challenge vets essentially get their way the majority of the time, and there being this like very solid alliance that essentially steamrolls the entire season. I still think seeing these attempts to be making these big moves along the way, and there actually being a big move made along the way and getting Bananas and Jordan in elimination together, to where I think there's enough fun stuff on this season. And even beyond that, I mean, you have like Kellyanne being a really fun character on this season. You have, again, the likes of Kiki and Troy, and even like Zara being likable presences here. Again, I really like the dynamic between Zara and Wes. And again, I just found the gameplay of the season to be really fun, to where, well, yeah, it's underwhelming to see Argentina all go out very early and having no real shot at the game. Yeah, it's underwhelming to see, again, this big majority alliance clump come together and never really make a move against each other simply because of their pre-existing relationships. I still feel like this season ends up being a solid one for me, despite how underwhelming of a season it is considering its concept, where for me, I still like this season. It's here number 5. Now number 4, and now we're getting to a pretty big shakeup on this list from what my initial draft of this list was, where straight up number 3 and 4 on this list were number 1 and 2 when I initially created this list. However, again, through rewatching all these seasons, I feel like my opinion on these next two kind of went down a little bit, even though they're still pretty good. But at number 4, I'm going to go with the Challenge Australia. To which, obviously, with this placement here, the Challenge Australia is the highest ranked season of the World Championship series. It is higher than the other lead-ups to the World Championship, along with being higher than the World Championship itself. To where, again, I think Australia is a very good season of the Challenge. I think it is one that, while, again, it continues on the format of the other international series, again, literally being the exact same format as USA won, though with a little bit of a shakeup in, again, different house, and also, again, some inclusion of ride or die challenges. It is a season that, again, can be seen as derivative from that point of view. However, I think something that really excels this season is the casting. Not necessarily because it's the most dynamic cast in the world. I mean, there's definitely a decent amount of duds, and even people that make it far that are not the most riveting TV. However, I do think the way that this season was cast was in a way that led to this really interesting split house dynamic, to where, while, again, I do not love the fact that so many Bachelor people got on this cast, it did lead to, again, that clearly being a side that forms from the very beginning, and obviously a lot of the others kind of form this other grouping, to where, well, again, supposedly there's a lot more ickiness involved in the splitting of this house, with like Ryan in particular supposedly being extremely homophobic, and that could definitely taint some things. At least from the way it was presented on the show, it made for a really interesting dynamic with a lot of fighting between the groups, particularly in the middle portion of the season, where I will say I think the first couple episodes are a little bit on the slower side of things, where I think the middle stretch of the season is very, very strong, particularly of how split these two sides are. However, I will say again, I think something that took away a bit from the season for me is the fact that I did think it gets to a bit of a slow start. I think the first couple episodes are not great. All in the fact that I think the back portion of the season is also not the greatest, where it just felt like the likes of Grant and Emily getting kind of led to the slaughter by those last few episodes, though. I do really like how the season concludes, though. I really like Kiki, and I really like her winning trajectory, which is fun. I also really like Troy and his winning trajectory. And again, his elimination win against Conrad is still a pretty insane one there. Beyond that, I thought it was cool to see Brooke from Australian Survivor on this season. Now, again, she doesn't really do much on this season, but again, I thought it was cool to see her there. I really like Connor as well on this season. Grant and Emily, despite the fact they're not the most likable presence in the world, I thought they at least brought good TV to the show, to where, as always, still really like Challenge Australia. I still think, again, it's in the upper tier here of spin-offs for sure, but the reason why it's not higher on this list is because, again, I do think the beginning of the season's a bit slower than I remembered, and I do think the overall level of gameplay on this season ends up not being the most interesting, considering how much the Bachelor Alliance really just held the numbers for the majority of it, but I still like the season as a whole, and that's why it's here number 4. Now, number 3, and again, at number 3, I had the season that was actually going to be number 1 coming into this list, where before rewatching all the seasons, this was by far my favorite spin-off season. However, rewatching it, again, I was a bit underwhelmed. Not that it's not good still. Again, it still is. It's still number 3 on this list. However, again, I think my opinions of it are very similar to that of Challenge Australia, and that season is the Challenge All-Stars 2, which ends up being the highest ranked All-Star season here. And again, All-Stars 2, again, I remember loving at the time. I really loved this split house dynamic. I thought there's some really interesting gameplay involved on this season. I really like the arcs of the likes of Nehemiah and Melinda, and again, I love that Johnny and MJ won, who I think are 2 very likable presences as well, where, while again, their overall win is very wonky. And I was happy with that result. And again, us getting that back and forth earlier in the season of the two sides getting power at different points, I thought was interesting to see. Again, I love the episode where Derek goes into elimination, and like Steve getting into a bit of tiff with Katie, and that was fun. I think you also got a lot of drama from Ayana, that was fun to see. And in general, again, I really like how this season plays out. I do think, again, I think there's some slower episodes here and there. I don't think the season's as consistent as I remembered it being. But again, I think whenever the main storyline of the season is involved, again, this division between the King's Palace and the Darrell, Brad, MJ side. So I think anytime the main storyline of the season is focused on, again, this division between the two sides, I think the season is really interesting. The problem is that the vision isn't necessarily focused on throughout the entirety of it. And there's a decent amount of points in the season where the season is just kind of lackluster, though, again, when it's good, it is really good. I just feel like its consistency is not as much as I would want it to be. Even though, again, I think the gameplay is interesting at points. I also think there's some really good casting choices on this season that, for some reason, haven't been back in future seasons of All Stars, from like Kahada and Casey Cooper, who obviously has a weird outcome to her run on this season, where, again, I do think there's a lot to like from All Stars 2. I just think the other 2 seasons bring a bit more to the table. Third, because of that, for me, All Stars 2 lands here number 3. Now number 2, and again, definitive top 2 for me. I think these 2 seasons are the 2 that I enjoyed the most on the rewatch here. I think both of these are really, really strong seasons of the challenge, which might not be the popular opinion, at least to this degree, with the season I'm about to be talking about. However, this is a season that, again, I literally just finished rewatching, and I really adored it for most of the time, and that season is the Challenge USA 2. And again, USA 2 is a season that I enjoyed at the time. I remember when it was originally airing, I thought this was a very solid season of the challenge, definitely a step up from USA 1, and in general, one of the better modern challenge seasons. And having just recently rewatched that, I think I further back that up to an even further extreme. I really do like USA 2. Again, there are definitely flaws with this season. I think there's definitely a middle stretch of the season that kind of goes on a bit too long. Definitely a point in the season where it's just simply like Cassidy and Chris getting thrown to elimination over and over and over again. That's not the most riveting in the world. However, at the same time, I think the fact that the season culminates in a Chris Underwood win is just really incredible. I think really the season ends with a perfect outcome. I mean, Chris Underwood winning after having to go to so many eliminations and having his back against the wall the entire time is so satisfying. Along with the fact that we also get a Desi win, to where, again, Desi winning after what happened to her in season 1 is also a really satisfying outcome. To where, again, I thought this was a perfect outcome for this season. And we also get some pretty fun gameplay moments through this season. where, again, while the vets do eventually gain control and really just steamroll their way to the end, I actually really like the beginning portions of this season, where the vets were facing a lot of adversity, where we do see the vets being outplayed by the newbies. And again, we have that like Tori versus Janae elimination early on. We have bananas being thrown in early on. Though again, I also like to fight back. I do really love the deliberation where Josh goes off on the Survivor people, and that's really entertaining TV. And also, I really do love the Hopper and would really like to see it back in future seasons. The fact that the elimination participants decided by a random draw, the number of balls in that draw is determined by how many votes you get from your fellow players. Again, I think that's a very interesting dynamic here that plays out in a pretty fun way to where, well, obviously adds a level of randomness to the game. At the same time, I mean, this is a challenge to where when have they ever cared about that beforehand? But again, I do think most of the time this would lead to pretty interesting TV. And just overall, I do really like this season. The only reason it's not number one here is because I do think there are some middling episodes along the way. I think like the Monty Boot episode is one that's particularly lackluster. Beyond that, you also have, again, a lot of the same people going to elimination over and over and over again, which can get repetitive, but I do really like the majority of this season, with, again, having a great outcome. I really love the role that like Michaela plays on this season. I really like Alyssa L on this season. And in general, again, I really like seeing the vets having their backs against the wall for a lot of this season. Where, again, as a whole, I really like the season. Yes, there's some lulls along the way, but at the end of the day, I think of it good enough to be here number 2. Now, number 1, best challenge spinoff of all time ends up being the challenge Champs vs. Stars 2. And Champs vs. Stars 2 really feels like a season that should not have been as good as it is. I think it's a season that really excels beyond its initial premise in a way that ends up actually being incredible TV. Champs vs. Stars 1 obviously was, again, a massive letdown. Again, a season where the champs just dominated the show the entire time. And for them to essentially be doing that concept again feels terrible, but again, they actually rectify it here, where, again, the season doesn't end up being the champs as a team versus the stars as a team. They instead kind of learned their mistake from last time and mix the two teams, where it is still a team-based game. The teams are mixed between champs versus stars to kind of equal the two sides out. And again, with us seeing the stars actually playing hard here and actually gaining the majority on one of the sides and having to see, again, the challengers play from the bottom, it, again, ends up being a really interesting dynamic here. Now, again, that kind of shifts midway through the game, but even at that point, you do get this like big underdog run from Casper and Luis, where, and both of them are incredible characters on this season, where I would love to see them play the challenge again, even though I don't really expect it at this point. But again, you do get a lot of drama from this season. Now, a lot of it gameplay focused, which I think is really interesting, but also you do get the likes of like Hennessy, who brings a lot of drama early on. You get like Casper getting into some fights, and his like fight with Shane is a really entertaining one, where I think this season definitely brings a lot of drama to the show, while also, again, having a decently high level of gameplay, to where, again, it is interesting to see these stars not roll over and die and actually giving the champs an actual fight for their money. Now, I will say the champs themselves are, again, a bit of a random grouping of people. Again, there's definitely a lot of non-champs on the champs team, from the likes of like Anissa and, again, Devin at the time, Kayla, Cam, to where, again, the fact that they are actually considered champs is kind of questionable. And to be fair, the stars themselves are somewhat questionable at points, particularly Jose from Big Brother being there, which, again, really funny that he's considered a star on this season, especially because they literally bring him back immediately after this for Final Reckoning, where it really makes you question, like, why was he on this season? But again, he makes for good TV, though, at points, to where, in general, again, I really like Champs vs. Stars 2. I think it plays out in a pretty perfect way, to where, again, unlike something like USA 2, which, again, I still think is very, very good. Again, that season definitely has, again, some slower episodes, definitely some lulls. I don't feel like there really is ever a real lull in Champs vs. Stars 2. I think it's a season that is mostly consistent, where I think every episode brings something to the table, because you do have this like constant drama between the champs and the stars the entire time. And again, you do have Luis and Casper really playing super aggressively. That really ends up boosting this season, to where, while the season, again, still wins and the champs winning at the end, I still think, again, it's actually an interesting champs team, with the giving Tony his only win, so at least that's something to where, and as a whole, I do really like Champs vs. Stars 2. I think it's a near perfect spin-off of the show, and that's why it's here number 1. But there we go. I mean, that is my ranking of every spin-off in the challenge series. Now moving forward, again, I'll still be continuing to cover the challenge. I mean, obviously Challenge 40 should be airing by the time this video comes out, where, again, I'll be doing a review of that. Beyond that, again, I'll probably continue doing reviews for the main series. I'll be honest, I'm a bit conflicted on whether or not I'm going to continue continue on with the spin-offs to where, and we know All Stars 5 is coming, and I don't know if I'm going to do a video on it or not. I think I'm a bit conflicted on if I do continue on. Though again, I haven't really fully decided exactly what I'm doing there, but again, maybe expect a video on that. In general, I would like to do more other random challenge videos, though it really comes down to finding time on the schedule to do them, but maybe I'll have more of these kind of random rankings down the road. Who knows? But for now, that is the video. Thank you for watching.